Welcome back to another episode of the Man Camp podcast. I have with us a familiar face if you've been with us from the very beginning of Man Camp. And I say familiar face not because we had video, this is the first season of video, but maybe from social media. We posted a lot about Bob, but in season 1 of Man Camp, we had Bob on. And I will say, he holds the record of the most listened to episode in the 3 seasons of Man Camp podcast, Bob Hasson.
Zach Curry.
It's good to have you back.
Happy to be here with you.
I'm glad that you're here for our first ever video season as we go into season 4. Mm-hmm. And lots happened since season 1.
Yeah.
We've moved to San Diego where you live, and so we get to see each other. Fun fact, Bob and I are not only good friends, but we're workout buddies.
Yeah.
So we work out pretty regularly together. And
why is that?
Because, well, there's a lot of reasons. We can't say all of them here.
Okay,
but
all right.
One of the big ones is, like you heard, if you've heard the episode, or will hear the episode with Zach Ernst, physical health and activity is very good for us.
Right.
But anyways, in addition to all that, you when we talked to you in season 1, you had written a book called The Business of Honor, and since then you've written 2 more books.
Oh yeah.
So you've been busy.
Yeah, I have.
Writing books, and we're actually going to talk about one of those books today, maybe both of them. Shortcuts, which is the newest one. But before we jump into all that, what I want to just kind of dive into, our theme for season 4 is the pursuit. And one of the things that I really respect, both personally, but also who you are, Bob, and what you bring, whether it's in business or speaking. You have your own podcast with Sean Bowles, Exploring the Marketplace, is this thing of how you, through your own life, through bringing in other people, highlighting and sharing this thing of how to pursue wisdom, how to pursue passion or purpose. And we're going to talk about some of those different things, but you've been an example of this to me in my own life, and I've seen you walk with many other people and just helping people pursue things in their life. I mean, you have another way you like to describe it, which we'll talk about as well. But at the end of the day, this thing that we're going after in season 4 is that we want to be men that are intentional. We've talked about living fully alive. We've talked about being in community. But one of the things we're really highlighting in is like what we pursue, we find. What we pursue, we become. And so really looking at what are those things that we're pursuing in some of these areas are key. So anything to say about that before we dive into some questions I got for you?
No, I think it's awesome. Let's go.
Let's do it. So what I want to do is I want to start with this whole really, you hit a lot of these things that we talk about, wisdom or purpose or passion, in your most recent book, Shortcuts. It's actually, of all the books you've written, they're all good. This is my favorite book because you share a lot of real examples and stories, not just from your own life, but from multiple people, young, many of them young, that actually learned how to not take the quick, easy fix, but go through this process. But you talk about things like passion and purpose and wisdom. So I want to start with this. Why did you write this book, Shortcuts? And what is it? How does this connect to even this theme that we're going after and what we pursue and go after?
Well, I wrote the book because I've talked to thousands and thousands of young people, and I've heard over time a dissatisfaction of young people thinking that for whatever reason they haven't made it. And I wasn't on social media till 2017 when Danny and I wrote Business of Honor. And so I couldn't understand why I was hearing 25-year-olds or 28-year-olds say, I'm a failure because I'm not a millionaire. I'm a failure because I'm not further in my career. I'm a failure because just fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. The expectations were so high, I couldn't figure out, well, where is this coming from? Well, I got onto social media and I saw basically social media is a highlight reel of everybody's lives. And it looks like, what are you standing in front of a yacht? You're standing in front of a Bentley, you're standing in front of a private jet, you're standing in front of a vacation home, you're standing in front of a resort. And it looks like on social media, everybody's living this life and they've all made it, which isn't true.
Yeah.
1% of the people in America are millionaires.
Yeah.
And 75% of them are over 50.
Yeah.
So this thing that the young people are seeing and feeling is just absolutely not true, and that's one of the main reasons why I wrote the book.
Yeah, and with it, like the title is great because this concept of shortcuts, which, people are looking for life hacks, quick fixes, the easy way to get to whatever goal, destination, outcome quicker, has become this trend, or like there's a whole industry is on like how to hack the system and, whatever, become a millionaire, achieve the goals you want. But as someone who has had success in business and different areas of life, the way you got there wasn't that way. And I think we create like you said earlier, an unrealistic expectation by making that our primary goal.
Exactly. So one of the things that I think about is I'm a process guy.
Yeah.
And so I'm talking about the process of life and the journey of life. And for me, I've been in business for 45 years.
Mm-hmm.
And for 32 of those years, we were hitting singles and doubles and maybe an occasional double play.
Yeah.
We were going back and forth. It was just a long slog. And building something that is going to be substantial takes time. Now, in the media, we know of Apple computers or Microsoft or Dell computers or any of these tech companies, Google, Facebook, et cetera, who have what seems like been overnight successes. Mm-hmm. And for some businesses and some individuals in the 0.5%, maybe they will. But for the rest of us, it's going to be a long process. It's going to take time. It's going to take weeks, months, years, decades, until you get some semblance of whatever you measure success is. Yeah. To me, our identity, speaking to the Man Camp audience, is that we are loved sons of God. Yeah. That's where our bar is. We are loved sons of God. And if we recognize that, and if we can sit in that as our identity, then it doesn't matter where we go. Performance is broken off, mm-hmm. because we're loved by the King. If we're loved by the King, then in the process, he's with us. Mm-hmm. And so many times, what I've seen, over the years, are people who are performance oriented. Yeah. And I'll find people who will set major goals in their lives that are unrealistic because they're not in relationship with other people. They haven't said, hey, what do you think about my goals right here? And, I want to be... I remember I was consulting with this guy, and he wanted to have 10 million testimonies in 2 years. And so I said, well, how many testimonies do you have? And he said, 327. And how many years has it taken you to get 327? And he said, 4. So I did the math, and I said, well, in that amount of years, you're going to have 1,200, not 10 million. Mm-hmm. Your goal is unrealistic. And he hadn't done the math. He just liked what 10 million sounded like. Mm-hmm. And so many times in our lives, we have these unrealistic expectations that we build in our head because, mm-hmm. we've heard certain things from different people, but we haven't taken the time to bounce them off friends or people that are mentors or people who will speak into our lives.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned social media, which really dives into comparison. You talked about identity. Mm-hmm. I think this matters for everyone, but even just specifically focusing on men, why do you think it's important to really look at not just identity, but this thing that we're talking about, process? You've hit several angles, but let's just focus in on men. I think this is a big deal for men to, there's many guys that feel like they're behind, they're right. failing, mm-hmm. and so there's a real opportunity or even battle to get caught in this cycle, and then we end up in this place where we don't want to end up.
Right. So we have a performance mentality. We think that if we perform, things will happen. Yeah. And we think they're going to happen in a condensed time. Again, sometimes God can do a miracle. God can heal somebody. God can do all these different kinds of miracles. And sometimes you have an idea and bang, you're an overnight success. Yeah. again, that's the 1/2 of 1%. The process is what we have to be cognizant of with Jesus.
Yeah.
We don't think about his 30 years on the earth being an apprentice.
Yeah.
He was on the earth for 30 years before his ministry started.
Mm.
Like, we don't ever think about that. He was a carpenter. Some people think he was a stonemason. Basically, the word in Greek could be stonemason or carpenter. But he worked under his dad.
Mm-hmm.
He worked on jobs. He was a blue collar worker, and it took him 30 years before he started his ministry. And the reason I say that is because we focus on his 3 years of ministry. But what do you think happened in the 30 years?
Yeah.
What do you think happened when he walked onto a job site?
Jesus on your job site.
Jesus on your job site.
Wow.
All of a sudden, the peace of God that passes all understanding is on your job site.
Yeah.
And so he was apprenticing, getting ready for these 3 years of ministry. We don't think about that. And for us guys in our careers, we take all of our self-image from what we do and how we do it. And so if we feel like we're failing, what does that lead to? Drug addiction, alcohol abuse, pornography, all these different things we see in the headlines of leaders and pastors and business leaders having moral failures.
Yeah, scandals, all these things.
Because they're not in a place where they can understand what God's doing in their life.
And some of it is connected to how we're measuring success. The timeline, you mentioned process, because I think it's pretty normal to be desiring or pursuing or wanting to have success, but if disappointment or, it doesn't measure up quickly, this is where it's very easy to lose hope, and then, you cope somehow,
You cope somehow. And you know this about me. I'm a strategic planner. I have goals. I set goals. I believe in setting goals. When people come to me and say, I want to start a business, or I'm in the middle of a business, I ask them, do you have a business plan? Do you have a plan? And most of the time it's no. And I'm about people putting the paper to the plan. Jeremiah 29:11 says, I know the plans I have for you.
Yeah.
And so I think God is in the planning.
Yeah.
This is how important work is to God. In Genesis 2:7, God breathes life into Adam. The very next thing he says to him is verse 15. He says, go tend to the garden or go to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then all the way into the New Testament, in John, Jesus says, my Father and I are always working. So this is a huge part of the economy of God, work.
Yeah.
And this is why we take, as men, so much self-image from it. But if it's wrong, if we're wrongly putting work into a place where we haven't invited God to partner in with us, then we're going to have these feelings of failure and frustration.
In your book, Shortcuts, you kind of start to break down some real key pillars that, as you kind of look under the hood, are connected to this thing of work and actually the everyday, like we're talking about not taking shortcuts, embracing the process. So then you start running into things like, passion, purpose, needing wisdom, the process, these things that, it's one thing to say, yeah, I want to, accomplish things and all that, but to get there, these aren't the only things, but they're some of the big ones. Wisdom's a big one. People, obviously, the Bible talks a lot about wisdom, and it's a way to get heavenly perspective into everyday life. But specifically looking at wisdom, passion, purpose, there's a way to get it. There's a way to go about it, and it's not taking shortcuts. It's not skipping the process. It's not a quick fix. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, each of these, I know you write chapters on each of these things, but I just want to I want to leave people with some snippets, and obviously diving into this because it's just, I think, so powerful and practical in our journey and life as men and leading and work and all these things. But let's just talk about wisdom. You've told me a lot, the most things you've learned is the hard way, which then led you to the process. But leads into each of these things: purpose, passion.
Yeah, well, wisdom is really interesting because a lot of people think that wisdom only comes with gray hair, right? And I know plenty of young people who have a gift of wisdom, and we have to be able to recognize that when people are speaking, they have wisdom. In my case, wisdom comes from me being able to talk about the mistakes that I've made, because I believe that we don't really learn from our successes, we learn from our failures.
Wow.
And so if you think about back in your life, when you've made mistakes, when you've almost gone bankrupt, when you've lost a job, when your dog has died, just figure out these times in your life. This is when you learn. When you're alone, when you're with God, when you're grieving something that's happened, you learn. When you've made a mistake that has consequences, you learn. You and I know people who have been in jail, and they sit in jail for however long they've been there, and they think about what's happened, and God fills them, and they come out and they're changed. So to think that you're on a trajectory in your life that is always like a hockey stick, is spiking, is not realistic. There are going to be it's going to look like this. It's going to be up and down. You're going to be in peaks and valleys. And when you're in the valleys is the time when you need to turn to God. But when do you learn how to turn to God? When you're in the peaks is when you learn at the top, when everything's good. This is when we have to learn to listen to God. So when we're in a crisis, when we're in the valley, we're not saying, "Oh God, speak to me," and then trying to hear His voice. Where's His voice? We need to learn when things are good, so that when things are bad, we have a body of work to go back on and say, "I have heard God for this and for this and for this and for this." And now that I'm in the valley of the shadow of death, I'm going to hear His voice. And it's not hard for us to tune back into Him. Because what do we need? We need two things when we're in the valley. We need to hear from God, and we need to hear from the friends that we've cultivated in vulnerability, transparency, and accountability.
So good. I love what you're saying too when you talk about learning from our mistakes. If we can do that, it actually frees us and helps us redefine how we process hard things. I think most of us, when failure or weakness or mistakes come in, we just want to get away as fast as we can from that. But like you're saying, if we can look at it differently, there's wisdom in that we can learn from. And there's a story I've heard you share before, like even on the topic of purpose. Like many men, you may be watching or listening, and you're like still trying to figure out, what's my calling, what's my purpose. You have a friend, you share this story a lot. You highlighted in your book as well that he had quite the journey up until what he's doing now, that if you asked him in the earlier points, he would be like, I don't know, like, why am I doing this? But then as you get further down the road, go through the process, it made sense. Can you share that story?
Yeah, well, let's talk about this. Our identity is who we are in God. Our purpose is who God has called us to be. Our assignments change.
That's good.
So this particular guy graduated from college, went to the Navy, went to the Naval Academy, went to the Navy. He was dissatisfied there because of all the rules and regulations. He went from the Navy to being a teacher, and he thought, listen, I can affect middle schoolers, and he taught. But the Christian school that he was at just wasn't right. So he transitioned from there to being a youth pastor at a church, and he was promised a bunch of stuff, and a transitioning pastor decided not to transition. And so he went from there to a construction company.
This is not like a normal professional path that you would take, probably, right?
And he was so burned out by the rigidity of the naval experience, but then how loose the Christian experience was, and that he just, in the construction company, he found no drama, and listen, I know what my job is. I'm going to do my job. And while he was there, while all the drama subsided away, he he figured out that he wanted to get a bigger degree in college. And so he went back to get his master's and eventually his PhD. And what he's going to do is be a professor. So how does all that connect?
Yeah.
Well, I found out in interviewing him that his dad, I mean, I knew this about his dad. His dad was in higher education in the university, and he was a discipler. And everywhere my friend was looking, he was hoping to be able to disciple people in the Navy, but there were too many rules. He was hoping to be able to disciple people in the Christian school and the church, and he was able to, but it was too loose for him. When he got to the construction company, he was like, I hope I don't have to disciple anybody. And I can just focus on my work. Well, that assignment gave him the ability to figure out really what he wanted to do. And that was to go back into the family business in higher education. So he moved his entire, by this point, he was in his 40s, he had 2 children, and he moved them across the world to England to get this amazing higher education master's and PhD.
Yeah, the process doesn't always look like the way we want it to. But if we're patient and we actually embrace the process, don't try to get out of it or find shortcuts, in that we discover these things. We discover purpose. We discover wisdom. We discover passion. I think you give this definition of passion where it is very different than what we see. Again, back to social media or culture or media and around us. Like passion is like what's in your heart, what makes you happy, and actually, like biblically, if you look at some of the most successful, inspired people, Olympic athletes, whatever, it's actually very different. And can you describe that? Because you write about this in your book, and I think it's so setting, like, or resetting this grid that we need to go after what we want the most.
So chapter 5 is titled, Do You Deserve Passion? And I thought that was fitting because one of the top 5 things that I hear is I'm not passionate about fill in the blank. My job, I work for a big corporation. They don't have any social justice causes. They're not believers. They're just greedy and going after corporate profits. I hear I'm not passionate about the place that I work, but I am passionate about this thing.
Yeah.
And so when I was writing the book, I looked for the root word, the definition of passion, and passion the etymology comes from the passion of the Christ.
Wow.
Now, the passion of the Christ is hanging on a cross and bleeding to death. That's the passion of the Christ. So passion comes from suffering.
Wow.
Suffering produces passion. So when you graduate from college, when you graduate from high school, you get into an entry-level position, and guess what? You're doing the jobs that no one else wants to do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that's going to make you passionate about that. I am not passionate about sweeping up the floor with cigarette butts. I'm not passionate about taking out the trash. I'm not passionate about working on spreadsheets all day. I'm not passionate about all these things in an entry-level position. But if you take time in the process and you move forward, all of a sudden in 5 years, you're the head of a department. And in 5 more years, you're the head of a division. And in 5 more years, you're the head of a region. And my point is that passion comes from paying your dues, number one, and passion also comes from people. So you're in a job where you're following your major or whatever it's what you're interested in. Just take your time, chill out, let your character shine before you, move forward, and build relationships with people. This is where we're passionate about is relationships. We're passionate about people. Passion comes from relationships. So while you're sweeping the floors or doing these entry-level position, if you build relationship with your coworkers, your supervisors, the people on the floor, you begin now to have a reason to go to work because you know people. And this is something that we know that relationships build your career. If you've ever looked for a job and you go to Indeed.com or whatever it is, and you're firing your resume out there, you think to yourself, if I only knew someone, if I only had a relationship with someone that I could hand my resume to and they could hand it to someone, and then because of the relationship, I could get a job. We know this. But it's that way in our careers as we're building. Passion is something that I think is really incredible. There's 24 hours in the day. Generally, we spend 8 hours at work, 8 hours sleeping. That gives us 8 other hours. If we're not passionate about work and we're not passionate about sleeping, now we have 8 other hours to follow something that we could be passionate about. And, you and I have talked to lots and lots of people who say, wow, I'm working 9 to 5 here, but I've been building this passion project, and I actually think that I could monetize it. And I actually think, so should I quit? No, don't quit. Build this until you are making money, until you're working 16 hours a day. Now you have to make a decision. Will this passion project, will it monetize the way that I think it's going to? If it does, okay, I'm going to quit the 9 to 5 job because I have something that I've taken the time and the process to build.
So good. Listen, guys, this is a bigger deal than I think many of us realize, because Bob hears this all the time. I hear this with young people as a leader in the church, and people are always asking, like, what's my calling? I want to do something I'm passionate about. But you have to step backwards, get perspective, and dive into what you're talking about, because most of the time we want the shortcut, we want the quick fix, and what we say we want and what we do are two separate things. And I love your definition, or this kind of highlighting this definition of true passion. I mean, another way to even look at it too is like, what are you willing? Like, what are you so drawn by, motivated, passionate about that you're willing to sacrifice? That's actually a clue as well. I mean, it's like back to the Olympic athlete. Like, there are people that train for years, a whole year, for if you're a sprinter, seconds in a race, and you're spending a year or more training day in and day out, and like, this is true passion. And yet our expectations often have set something up entirely differently. We want the instant success without being willing to pay the price. As we're starting to wrap up, I want to just ask you 2 more questions. It's kind of circling back around. The title of your book is Shortcuts, which is, I think, clever, catchy. But I think this is kind of like you're describing how do you get wisdom, what purpose is, what true passion is. Why do you think it is that we are so enamored with shortcuts, life hacks, quick fixes, fast solutions? Why is it that we're drawn to that more than what you've been describing?
Well, think about in our Christian communities. Think about, there's a speaker on stage, and the speaker comes down, and somebody comes up and says, will you pray for me for your anointing? It's always funny. Like, I get it. People want, but I have a friend who, is a healer, and people would always ask him that, and he would say, yes, I will. Go pray for 8,000 people, and then come back, and I will pray for you to have a healing anointing. And people are like, what? And the thought of that is, if you go pray for 8,000 people, you're probably not going to need an anointing for healing, because you've already done the work. And if you look in society, I mean, I grew up when stores weren't open on Sundays. I got saved at the end of the Jesus movement. But this weird thing started popping up called McDonald's, fast food. And all of a sudden, the country is all enamored by everything fast. Now we have fast casual, nice restaurants, but they're fast. I don't know why society and people in general are so enamored by wanting things quick. I think, my own personal feeling is they want things to be easy, and life just isn't easy.
Yeah, like along the similar lines where you're talking about praying for something, like, people I'm sure have done this before, but they see you, you have over 40 years in business and you've accomplished a lot of things that other people would want to accomplish. And like, it's like, what's the secret? Or will you pray for me? And, if you're honest, it's like, do you really, like, most people don't want what they think. Like, are you willing to pay that price? Are you willing to be this close to bankruptcy? Or, some of the most successful businesses have gone through multiple rounds of bankruptcy and they never gave up.
I don't know how they do that.
The point is the price, the process. Most people wouldn't want to go through that, but they do want the fruit and
the end result.
And the end result. And that is where we have to be like, what you just said, in the pain, in the process is actually where the character, the trust, all the things that you need. Some people get ruined by success, even your dreams, because there isn't a character in the foundation. This is why the process, in my opinion, the process is so important.
It's character building. And one of the things, in our streams is we don't talk about character. We talk about being godly. But what is our character? Is our yes, yes? Is our no, no? Or do we do what we say we're going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to display character like that. You were talking about athletes earlier, Olympic athletes. Well, in ultra endurance racing, which are 100-mile runs, century bike rides, bad water where they're running through the desert, it's not the person who's in the best shape. It's not the person who has trained the most. What it boils down to is the person who's willing to suffer.
Wow. It's a mentality.
When they have blisters all over their feet, when their shoes have melted on the pavement, when they have slept 1 hour in 24, who think they can't make it, who are willing in their mind to suffer longer. These are the guys men and women who win.
Yeah.
And so for most of us, suffering is, we're trying not to suffer.
Yeah.
And again, I'm talking about suffering in the context of athletics and a mindset.
Yeah.
But when we go after things we want, like you're saying, are we willing to pay the price? Are we willing to suffer for the things that we want? And a lot of times the answer is no.
Yeah. As we're closing, what would you say to the men that are listening? Listen, you're out there, maybe you own a business, or you're starting a new job, or you're trying to figure out purpose and calling. What we've been talking about today, I think, is so critical. I can't encourage you enough to go even and read this book, Barbara, especially if you're young, because there's just so many stories and examples that I think are so key, but it applies to everyone. As we're closing, what are some final thoughts you would say to encourage men? I mean, this applies to leadership, to family, to work, to life, but the goal here of this season especially, but the podcast overall, is to encourage men to live life fully alive. But we want to pursue the things that God has called us to, which what you've described is very practical, and we can put our hands to it.
So I believe that what we focus on happens.
Yeah.
I was talking earlier about strategic planning. If you want to build a business or build a career, put a plan together.
Yeah.
So that's number one. You're talking about pursuit in this season, and focus is part of pursuit. Then number two, embrace the process.
Yeah.
The process is going to be longer than you think it is, but embrace it and recognize that you're going to go over some speed bumps and you're going to be in some valleys. Number three, build committed relationships with one or two people. This has been the most important thing in my life, is having a handful of people that when I go through the speed bumps, I can reach out to and I can get perspective on.
Yeah.
Because in our minds, guys, we spin up these scenarios, and all of a sudden we're down way over there when the reality is over here. And then the last, number four, is look up what the word resilience means. Resilience is not how many times you're knocked down, it's how many times you get up.
So good.
And in this life, you're going to be knocked down.
Yeah.
You just got to keep getting up. You just have to keep getting up. Yeah. Those are the four that I would say.
So good. So good. Man, well, Bob, thank you so much for jumping on. Again, it's so good to have you back. I know that there's probably several things that Bob talked about, that we talked about today, that apply to your journey, your process, the things that you're pursuing. So I want to encourage you, go check out Shortcuts. You can go to bobhasson.com. You can find the other books there and resources as well. But I just want to encourage you, like, we have this invitation, we have this privilege as men to pursue the things that God's put in our life. And you have what it takes. It may not be easy, but it'll be worth it. And anything worth accomplishing, anything worth having, does not come without a price. So these things that Bob's talked about, process, how we engage these things, is so critical. So again, dive into this. We hope this has encouraged you. I hope it's given you some perspective. I know there's been a lot of practical things that you can apply to your life. As we close out this episode, we just want to remind you, you can email us if you have questions at mancamp@jesusculture.com. Follow us on Instagram at mancamp_podcast. We always love to hear stories of what God's doing. Maybe it's even questions. You can reach out to Bob. You can find him on Instagram as well. We're just so grateful that you're a part of this, not only community, but process. And so we don't take it lightly. We're honored. We love hearing the stories of how these episodes have encouraged you. So thanks so much for being a part of this. Until the next Man Camp episode, we'll see you, and we just want to encourage you, embrace the process.